you could walk down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the police pull up and say, "Hey, how can I help you? Are you okay?" Then you're white.
Right.
And so
exactly.
That's it. I want to touch on POC. People might think POC means different things. When you say POC, people of color. I know myself, I'm working on an outreach project where I'm bringing together mediators of color across the state of Oregon. And when I reach out to some of these places to ask if they have mediators of color or POC mediators, they don't really know what POC, some of them don't know what POC mean. They're like, we don't have any black folks, but there might be some people who identify as. And so, what does POC mean to you? Like, what's POC?
So you gonna put me on blast on this question. Bro. So that's an interesting question. And to be honest, I've been like working that definition out. Obviously, person of color means you are not considered a white person in this country.
Pretty much.
Yeah. If you do not consider, and I'm not talking about self, like if you are like, no, I don't consider myself as white, but everyone else considers you as white, I wouldn't know if that considers as a person of color. And I think a lot of people struggle with that because they could be white passing and not white. And so like people would want to sign up and come to a space, but just think about how all the dark and melanated folks across the spectrum feel when they see a white person looking into that space that's about and for POC. It brings up those same feelings and those things. And so, yeah, to me, it's like if you are noticeably not from white America, then that was what makes you a person of color. And I've never been the one to not tell somebody that they're not a person of color, but also if a white person walk up to me and they're like, I'm a person of color, I'm a most likely ask them like what is their definition of POC, because like I said, what person of color to me is somebody that their skin color will affect the way that they walk in this country. For example, like you said, walking down the street 3 a.m. in the morning, what is the police officer gonna do when it sees you? Excuse me, what is a racist gonna do when they see you? How about that? We just go that. We can base it off of what would a racist say to you based off of your skin color.
Right.
You know? And if they not gonna say nothing to you because they see you as one of them, then it's hard for me to say that that's a person of color.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just the way society's set up, where you have whiteness and then you have the others. Then it's like a spectrum. You have whiteness, then you have black, then you have everything in the middle.
Yeah.
And as closer you get to whiteness, the more of the resources that you have access to.
Definitely.
I've had plenty, not plenty, at least 2. So I'm doing my DNA research and all that. So I got 2 people in my family that passed for white, like going back maybe like great-grandfathers type thing, that passed for white until they couldn't.
For sure.
And so they were walking around life passing for white until one day somebody's like, hold on, let me see your papers. And then they was black.
And I will add one more thing, because also what we're not taking into account, because we're talking a lot about skin color, but also how you sound, because that can change.
The vernacular.
Yeah.
Right.
Because Latinx folks, a lot of them is light bright, can pass for white, but then that accent is strong, you know what I'm saying? Which will then change the way that they have to move and navigate as well. So I do have to acknowledge that. There's also white Latinx folks. There's also white. Yeah. So then how are we defining it? And that's important to talk about.
You wouldn't have white without anti-blackness. And then when you have whiteness and anti-blackness, whiteness is like access to just like resources. Like you mentioned earlier, like self-esteem, self-worth, freedom of expression, freedom of movement. All those are resources that help a person feel whole.
Yeah.
And when you're on the black end of the spectrum, you're not supposed to have access to any of those resources that are supposed to make you feel like a whole human being. Instead, you have access to things that make you feel, not even feel, that have you targeted, have you marginalized, and have you underserved. And so it's important to add that in, because that is part of the healing. We must heal. We must see all of our roles and how we impact the movement for liberation, and like how we show up. How whole are we as human beings? And if you don't have access to those resources, it makes it real hard to feel like whole.
Most definitely.